Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I am Bonnie Steepleton. I am Director of Student and Career Services at the University of New Mexico School of Law. And today we have Professor Cliff Villa with us. He is going to talk about finding employment with a federal agency. So welcome, Professor Villa. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bonnie.
And tell us a little bit about your background and what you know about federal agencies in your career.
Well, I was born and raised in Albuquerque, and my role models, both my mom and dad, worked for the federal government, the VA hospital here in Albuquerque. When I graduated from high school, I went straight to work for the federal government at Kirtland Air Force Base. And actually, Kirtland Air Force Base allowed me to work my way through college. So I got 4 years of great federal experience during college. And it was during college that it gave me the idea that maybe I want to work for the federal government full time. So from there, I went straight on to law school.
And tell us about your law school experience and how you got into teaching.
Well, I knew I wanted to study environmental law. That's the reason why I went to law school. And so I went to law school, and in my second year, they had on-campus interviews from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And I did a summer internship with EPA, and believe it or not, they made me an offer, and I went straight to work for EPA right out of law school.
That's tremendous. So why would a student consider working at a federal agency these days?
Well, I think the federal government offers so many advantages for students who are beginning their careers, even mid-career, something to think about at some point in your life. The federal government is so big, and so it covers every area of law. So whatever area of law that you might be interested in, whether it's civil or criminal, administrative, there is a federal agency that does that work. In fact, almost any federal agency would have any form of law. So if whatever it is you're interested, it was environmental law for me, but maybe it's trade, or maybe it's tax, or maybe it's commerce, or anything. There is a great opportunity for you in the federal government. They do hire students who are, recent or relatively recent graduates. It is the ultimate in job stability. They never have layoffs from the federal government. They might have a government shutdown once in a while, but in 25 years, they've never had layoffs or anything like that. So it's stability, it's benefits, and it's also amazing experience and an opportunity to do good for your country.
That sounds really attractive. I'm always telling students about the benefit of benefits, because that's the sort of silent compensation that students don't think about in terms of the value that it has, like you talked about stability and all those things. So those are really excellent points. Mm-hmm. So if I were a student, how do I go about finding a federal government job?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is you can't apply to the federal government. You can't even apply to a federal agency. You really need to be thinking about specific offices within a federal agency. For example, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has 10 regional offices across the country, in addition to a bunch of offices in Washington, D.C., all of whom hire independently. So you can apply to EPA Region 10 in Seattle, where I spent 20 years, or EPA Region 8 in Denver, or Region 6 in Dallas, or the EPA Office of Enforcement in DC, or the Office of General Counsel in DC. You really need to understand how agencies sort of structure their hiring. Some agencies are more centralized in Washington, D.C. The U.S. Department of Justice, for example, does a lot of hiring directly to Washington, D.C., but the individual U.S. attorney's offices hire independently. So you could probably find a U.S. attorney's office somewhere near you. So you really need to do your homework and study up and understand how they do their hiring, and then be prepared to do the legwork and whatever it takes to get noticed. So maybe if you're interested in any of the 10 EPA regions, you're applying to 10 different offices, and plus maybe offices and headquarters. If you have the flexibility to relocate, that can be a powerful advantage to you. There are a lot of federal jobs in New Mexico with Sandia and the Los Alamos, and the Corps of Engineers and Kirtland, but a lot of the jobs begin in DC. There's sort of a general, careers often begin in the East Coast and sort of work back westward. So when I began to work for the EPA, I went to EPA headquarters in DC, spent 2 years there, and another 2 years in Denver, and then ended up the last 20 years in Seattle. So people tend to move sort of westward. But if you could start your career in Chicago or Atlanta, where they have a lot more federal agencies and jobs, those are great places to start. And it doesn't mean you're committed to staying there forever. It just means you've got a really great start in your career.
That's wonderful. Is there a portal, or how do you even find where these regions are? Do you talk to people? How do you do that?
All of the above. You could do a lot of internet research. You could study how the agencies are structured, where they have their regional offices and field offices. And then usually if you find the website for the regional office or the field office, you'll find something about how to apply, or just find a name of a person and send them an email and say, hey, I'd like to set up an informational interview. Could we talk? Or in the pre-COVID days, could we get together for coffee or something like that? A Zoom chat. Don't trust everything you see on the internet, because it may just lead you to some answering machine that nobody is monitoring. Find real people with real names and email addresses and send them. Now, for applying for federal jobs, you will often see in formal announcements something called USA Jobs, which is a one central portal for handling federal applications. You should use USA Jobs. You could read it and they will have job announcements. I would just recommend that you not rely exclusively on USA Jobs. When you submit an application to USA Jobs, it may do nothing. It may wait for contractors to sort of discover some keywords somewhere down the road. You could use USA Jobs, but make sure that you find a live person. I'll give you one example. My wife works for the U.S. Forest Service here in Albuquerque, eminently qualified. She's a chemical engineer by training, worked for the U.S. Navy, worked for the U.S. EPA in Seattle, but could not get any response from the Albuquerque office of the U.S. Forest Service. She waited 9 months before I said, you should just send an email to that office. And she did. And that week, she heard back. Within a week, she had the job. So follow up, find live people, develop relationships. That's how people find, work and how they come to know and trust you. There are a few other programs you should consider. Many agencies have what's called an honors program. The U.S. Department of Justice has an honors program, the Department of Interior, Department of EPA. So you could look for things like honors programs and often hire students right out of law school on maybe 1 or 2 year rotations. Those are a great way. I went into EPA through the honors program, and they still have it today, and it can be very, very valuable. A third option is something called the Presidential Management Fellows Program, which is managed by the Office of Personnel Management of the federal government. And what they do is they collect a lot of your personal information. And then if you qualify to be a Presidential Management Fellow, you have 12 months then to sort of find a host agency. So it's like you're pre-qualified for a really great federal job, and then you're on a short list, and then agencies may come and find you as a presidential management fellow. I think we have at least one presidential management fellow from UNM Law recently now working in the Department of Commerce. We have more than one honors hire at the U.S. Department of Justice right now and EPA. So UNM Law has actually done pretty well at placing people in federal jobs, and you could be next.
Well, thank you so much, Professor. It's been wonderful talking with you, and I encourage students from any law school to consider a job in federal government. Thanks, and I hope you have a great evening.
So one last thought when it comes to seeking federal employment, and that is be patient, be prepared to go out of law school and get some experience in any field of law, just gathering real experience in legal analysis and legal advocacy. Think about judicial clerkships, as you've probably heard. Think about state agencies. Think about private firms. Think about getting 2 or 4 years of experience in practice as an attorney, and then continuing to apply or reapply to federal agencies as you may be interested. Of course, keep your eye on things like USA Jobs, keep your ear open to things like alumni networks, and you may gather that experience and become the perfect candidate for a wonderful federal position. If you have any further questions, please always reach out to me through the law school. I'd love to talk with you more. Thanks.